Coming out of the recession and its own bankruptcy, Chrysler needed a hit bad. Luckily for the struggling third wheel of Detroit, the fourth generation Jeep Grand Cherokee, chassis code WK2, would be that hit that it so desperately needed. This week I look at the pre-Hellcat sporty version of the WK2, a 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT. Alright folks, a little housekeeping to start off. Sorry for the late episodes. As of late, we recently got a puppy, and if you happen to hear her in the background, I'm currently recording next to her pen so she doesn't freak out. Anyways, here's the episode. So in the past, I talked about my nostalgic love for 90s GM and square body Chevy trucks, as those were the cars and trucks my parents had during my youth. But thanks to my Grandma Jane and Grandpa Steve, I also have a big affinity for Jeeps, especially Grand Cherokees. Up until around the time of my high school graduation in 2011, both would get 2-year leases on matching Grand Cherokees. So my earliest memories of my grandparents were those of their matching ZJs and WJs in their driveway. With the exception of the WK 3rd generation for their mid-aughts merger of equals design, I love Grand Cherokees, and the WK2 was no exception upon its launch in 2011. The origins of the Grand Cherokee itself was sort of a last hurrah by AMC. Originally developed as an XJ Cherokee and SJ Wagoneer replacement, AMC's struggles and eventual Chrysler buyout would delay the Grand Cherokee project from a late 80s launch to an early 90s one. This was because Lee Iacocca wanted to push the second-generation Chrysler minivan launch first, since the minivan had been a guaranteed gangbuster move for Chrysler, unlike a premium-ish SUV. This pushback would help it take some of the wind out of the Ford Explorer's sails, which had very much started the push of suburban America from wagons, sedans, and minivans towards SUVs. Still intended on being a direct replacement or a full-blown second generation of the Cherokee, the project would be shown to the world in concept form in 1989 as the Jeep Concept 1. But following the concept's debut, the project would now shift from being an XJ replacement to supplementing it, the Cherokee's upscale bigger brother, the Grand Cherokee. The Grand Cherokee was a massive sales success for Jeep and Chrysler, and was such a success that Chrysler thought better of having a Dodge twin sold alongside. The Grand Cherokee was such a massive success that it would sit atop Jeep's lineup for almost 30 years until the rebirth of the Wagoneer, and wouldn't get a Dodge relative until the third generation Durango would use the WK2's underpinnings to become the third row people mover. When you thought of a Jeep that wasn't a Wrangler, more than likely a Grand Cherokee would pop in your head. There's now 5 generations, impressive off-road chops, and a premium-ish interior that would make you feel like you've achieved something with your Grand Cherokee purchase. The WK2 would be the 4th generation of the famous nameplate, and would help facilitate Chrysler out of its bankruptcy due to it being exactly the product the company needed at the time. I said it earlier, but the WK before it was probably my least favorite Grand Cherokee. It's just blobby and blocky in all the wrong ways of mid-aughts Daimler Chrysler design, and had all the build quality and reliability of that period. The WK2, not WL for some odd reason, as other Jeep products were already moving towards the L designation in their chassis codes in the 2010s, was a massive step forward for the nameplate. Sitting on a Mercedes-derived platform similar to the Charger and Challenger, the WK2 would introduce a fully independent suspension for the first time in the nameplate's life. Sure, old heads and diehards would moan about the loss of the solid axle, but to be a flagship premium SUV, Jeep needed to do this to optimize road comfort for most buyers. And besides, if you really needed to walk out of a Jeep dealer with something with solid axles ready to take on Moab, you still had the Wrangler. Upon its launch in 2011, you had 2 engines available, and these would be the 2 engines you'd find in most WK2 Grand Cherokees. The 3.6-liter Pentastar V6 in base models, and the 5.7-liter Hemi V8 and higher trims. But starting in 2012, you started to see other engine options become available. Capitalizing off the hype of the WK's SRT8 model, the SRT8 would return by stuffing a naturally aspirated 6.4-liter Hemi V8 producing 475 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque under the hood. In 2014, the 8 was dropped from the model's name, making this the Grand Cherokee SRT until the end of the WK2's life cycle. 2014 would see the return of a VM Motorai diesel model, known as the Eco Diesel in the WK2. But in 2018 would see the WK2 model that all kids would probably prefer to see on YouTube since number is big, the SRT Trackhawk, which would slap a 707 horsepower Hellcat Hemi V8 under the hood. And when that happened, the SRT became just the SRT, and sort of became the forgotten model in the Grand Cherokee's lineup. And that's a shame. This is a fun Jeep, even if it only has 475 horsepower. The Trackhawk is nuts, yeah, and I'm glad that it was built. But that model's existence sort of made the SRT a stopgap model in between normal Grand Cherokees and the Trackhawk. Regardless, the SRT is still a bucket of fun. Power from the 6.4 is sent to an 8-speed ZF 8HP 70 automatic transmission and split via a MP 2010 transfer case. The different drive modes in Select Track, that's TRACK, not TRAC like in other Grand Cherokees. The different drive modes in the Select Track system would all feel drastically different as they split power differently and adjust the Bilstein dampers accordingly. In most modes, power is split 40-60 between the front and rear, but in Snow mode this splits this 50-50, and Track splits it 30-70. On top of that, suspension is placed in its stiffest setting in Track, and traction control is automatically cut off. Other SRT-specific goodies you get are the 6-piston Brembo brakes in the front and 4-piston rears, SRT-specific pages in the head unit where you can look up engine statistics, keep tabs on the 0 to 60 times, etc., 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 a body kit and hood vents, the previously mentioned suspension and transmission modes, a launch mode that I completely forgot to try in my brief drive with this Jeep because I'm a terrible car YouTuber, and of course wider tires and wheels for added handling. Also on the inside you got plenty of SRT patches and badges, and plenty of Alcantara and fake carbon fiber to make the SRT feel even more premium-ish over lower WK2 models. Behind the wheel, despite being just the SRT, it's still a hoot. It only has 475 horsepower, but you know what? That's still plenty enough to send you into a series of giggles like a schoolchild. It'll drift if you want it to, but the one thing I wasn't expecting to is just how planted it was in the twisties. Even in its stiffest setting, it doesn't really beat you up. It soaks up bumps shockingly well, and it will point itself easily in the right direction when you get those rear wheels lit up. Like, I shocked myself expecting to overcorrect like in other trucks and SUVs when you shut off traction control, but the SRT was more than willing to point itself in the right direction when sliding. You just gotta trust it. Man, this was such a blast to drive on back roads. It's extremely comfy as well. Not straight up luxurious like later models have become, but still premium-ish as I've described earlier. I do wish some of the hard plastics felt better, and some of the fit and finish on the interior is feeling a little lacking now that this is a almost 10-year-old Jeep, especially in the second row. But man, this is something I could easily lose miles in. Even with the 13 city, 19 highway fuel economy, you can still expect a nearly 500-mile range with a fill-up and a long drive. And the cargo area is massive. The second row, of course, folds flat and easily, and you even have some extra storage around the spare. Fun little quirk, in the rear, it even came with a factory flashlight that charges, or is supposed to charge when you put it back, but it appears this one has died a long time ago. This particular 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT is owned by friend of the show Greg of Beaufort, South Carolina, and his wife Rachel. They purchased this Jeep in 2021 used, and actually got a pretty good deal for it because it was a rebuilt title car. Now, this is where the story for this Jeep gets a little weird. Right before COVID hit in 2020, this Jeep was traded in by the original owner. During the pandemic and when global parts supply ground to a halt, parts became incredibly hard to find. The dealer ended up pulling the fascia off of this Jeep to put on another Grand Cherokee SRT with less miles, but with nose damage because they couldn't get the parts at the time. When parts started flowing again, they did end up replacing the front fascia finally. So with 6-figure miles and a rebuilt title, Greg and Rachel were able to get this SRT for the price of a used base 5.7 WK2. This Jeep has been Rachel's daily, and it's been their road trip vehicle for the last 2 years. The only major issue they've had was coming back from a Charlotte road trip when they were living in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and one of the Bilstein shocks went out, and the Jeep slammed itself into its lowest setting. He said it was one of the longest drives they've had because it truly felt like it was riding on the bump stops, and every bump felt like a punch in the kidneys. If you know anything about I-40 in Tennessee. But other than that, it's been a reliable and fun daily for them, with it currently sitting at around 157,000 miles. The WK2 Grand Cherokee was a massive sales success for Jeep and Chrysler as a whole. Sales had ground to an all-time low in 2009, coupled with the global recession hitting large SUVs hard, and the WK being, well, kind of a mess. So in came the WK2 in 2011 with its hugely improved and cleaner styling, its better build quality, and much improved ride. Sales increased every year, breaking the 200,000 a year mark for the first time in 2016 since the first year of the WK in 2005. Now, as much as I like it, the WK2 isn't without its fault. The biggest issue with these refreshed 2014 and 2015 models is the shifter. It's not a standard Perndl shifter like you'd expect. It doesn't really click into every gear like a normal shifter. You kind of glide it from one end to the other without realizing it. This was such a major issue for drivers that it led to multiple crashes and injuries, and even the death of young actor Anton Yelchin of Star Trek fame when he was run over by his own Grand Cherokee after he failed to realize it was still a gear. This led to a massive recall, and in 2016, Jeep reintroduced a more traditional Perndl shifter. Hate to end this video on a downer, but other than the shifter, the 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT is a fantastic blast of a sporty SUV. Sure, it doesn't have the Trackhawk's Hellcat engine, but the 6.4 is still a fun engine in its own right, and it's more than enough to make this 5,200-pound SUV feel like something much smaller and nimbler. It's a reminder that just 475 horsepower is still a lot of power, and more than most people would ever need or use. The WK2 Grand Cherokee helped lift Chrysler out of its bankruptcy and into relevance again, and the WK2 was such a leap forward that Jeep was able to keep it in production for 11 years with only minor refreshes to keep it relevant. It was even briefly sold alongside the new WL Grand Cherokee in 2022 as the Grand Cherokee WK as they transitioned production towards that new model. I like the WK2, and I could easily see myself in one in the future, even if it's not one of the sportier models. 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT. One fantastic romp. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. Once again, huge shout out to Greg and Rachel of Beaufort, South Carolina for driving up to Troutman to let me film their Jeep for this show. I'll be sure to link Greg's Hellcat Dakota pages in the description of this video. If you have a car or truck you'd like to see on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte or Mooresville, North Carolina area, email me a submission of your vehicle at wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's right, submit your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. That's wookiedrives@gmail.com. Don't forget to give the video a like, drop a comment with some feedback. Any sort of interaction with this video really helps small channels like mine grow in the algorithm. Share with all your SRT Grand Cherokee friends. And finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for more Wookie Drives like these. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.